In this video, I'm going to show you how to transfer an image like this one onto your paper using a carbon transfer paper. Artists sometimes use this technique to save time, and that's exactly what I'm having my students do for this project. This lesson's all about color mixing, learning how to use the 3 primary colors to create a realistic full color painting. Since the focus is on painting skills, not drawing accuracy, I don't want them to spend weeks trying to perfect a sketch. Normally in my class, we tape our paper to a drawing board before painting. The tape creates a nice clean border and keeps paint from running off the edges. But since I have so many students and not enough boards for everyone, we're going to draw that border directly on the paper instead. So I'm using this ruler to line up with the edge and draw a straight border that's about 1 inch wide. I've cut my paper so that the size of the reference photo will fit neatly within that space. It's going to be 8 inches by 10 inches on the inside. This border will give students a little room to test colors as they mix, and it also keeps paint off the table since they can brush right up to the edge without worrying about neatness. And then later, once everything is dry, we can trim that extra border off with a paper cutter for a clean final painting. So let me show you how carbon transfer paper works. If I want to use this paper and I want to transfer this image to that piece of paper, I'm going to lay the carbon paper with the carbon side facing down on the paper that I'm transferring, and then I'm going to lay the image on top. So I'm going to trace just a few of these sprinkles right here that's on this cupcake. And when I move it away, you can see where it pushed the carbon from that side of the carbon paper down onto my paper. You can reuse the same piece of carbon paper many times. It lasts through quite a few transfers. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to transfer a printed image onto our painting paper. For tracing, I like to use a harder pencil, something like an HB. A lot of students reach for a 6B pencil because it makes a darker mark, but softer pencils wear down quickly and they get messy. Harder pencils stay sharper and make cleaner lines, and that helps the carbon transfer more precisely. And when I trace, I use about the same pressure I normally would for a drawing, maybe just a little firmer to be sure the lines transfer clearly. Now, to tape down the transfer paper, I'm going to line it up and I'm leaving a little space at the top. And that's so that I can see where to center my image at. And since there's nothing at the top of this image anyway that I need to trace, that's going to be fine. So I've got my carbon paper laid down, and now I'm centering the paper, and I'm really careful to put it right in the middle. And I'm going to use painter's tape to tape down the corners. The painter's tape is less likely to tear the paper when I remove it later. But honestly, since I'll be trimming off that border at the end, it doesn't really matter too much if the tape does leave a mark. So now I'm ready to start tracing. If your transfer lines are light or hard to see, just take your time and try to keep track of areas that you've already traced and which ones you haven't, because it's easy to lose your place, especially with detailed images. So work slowly and check as you go. You can rest your hand on top of the carbon paper. That's totally fine. Just resting your hand is not going to make any marks. It would take something sharper, like if you scratch it with your fingernail or something like that, that would make a mark on the paper. So don't worry, it's okay for you to rest your hand for stability while you trace. A question that I get asked a lot is, do I need to trace this part? And honestly, whatever you trace is up to you. The things that you trace will give you information that you're recording for yourself. For example, right here, there's a value change between this area and this one. And so I added a line to remind myself where that shift happens. I could probably figure that out later, but it's helpful to have that visual cue. You can include as much or as little information as you want. Just focus on tracing the details that will help you when you start your painting. When you think you've finished tracing everything, it's a good idea to tilt your paper slightly to the side. Sometimes the lines are hard to see straight on, but if you're able to catch the light just right, you can see the shiny reflection of the graphite. That makes it easier to spot any areas that you might have missed. Like right here, I can see a few of these sprinkles that I thought I traced, but actually I didn't. Another tip, even though I know that these highlight areas will end up being brighter or even white in the painting right here, I still trace around them. That way I know exactly where those highlights belong when I start painting. And then later on, I can just paint right over that line with a white stripe, and I'll show you how to handle that when we get to the painting stage. For now, I think that I've traced just about everything that I need. When you're ready to remove your image, peel the tape off carefully. I like to lift from the corners and slide a fingernail or a tool under the edge of the tape on the outside. If you peel it off from the middle, you might accidentally scratch the carbon paper and leave unwanted marks. Once the tape is off, set the carbon paper aside because it can be reused multiple times. Now you can check your transfer and see how it turned out. I think mine looks pretty good. It doesn't seem like I missed much, so I'm happy with it. At this point, the lines are fairly dark. If you're planning to build up several layers of paint, that's really not a big deal, but if you like to soften them a little, you have a couple of options. You could lightly erase, but I prefer brushing on a thin coat of gesso. It lightens the lines just enough and seals the surface so the graphite or carbon won't smear into the paint while you're painting. I've added a small amount of gesso to my palette here, just enough to start with so I don't want to waste any. I can always add more as I need it, so just get a little bit. I'm brushing it over the entire image. I'm not worried if I paint past the border line. If your border starts to fade while you work, you can always line your ruler back up and redraw it later. Make sure your gesso layer stays thin. Spread it evenly before it starts to dry so you can still see your transferred lines underneath. You can even add a little bit of water if you want it to be more transparent. And that's it. My image is transferred, sealed with a thin coat of gesso, and it's ready for the next step, mixing colors and blocking in the underpainting.